Hello, everyone, and welcome to uh, yet another one of the Drexel University Library's Open Access Week talks. I'm Matt Sherman. I'm the Digital Curation Librarian and co-chair of the library's Scholarly Communications Working Group. Open Access Week is a global event promoting the access to knowledge, highlighting open activities, and promoting actions that will make more scholarly and educational materials freely available to teachers, learners, researchers, and the public. Today, we welcome Pratusha Reddy to speak to us. Pratt received her Bachelor of Science in Biomedical Engineering from Drexel in 2017 and is now pursuing a Doctor of Philosophy in Biomedical Engineering. In parallel to her dissertation research, she has worked on numerous research projects that focus on assessing the efficacy of training programs, expertise development, and cognitive workload in real-world applications. Pratt's presentation today is entitled Individual Differences in Skill Acquisition and Transfer Assessed by Dual Task Training Performance and Brain Activity. She will speak for roughly 20 minutes, followed by 10 minutes for questions. Please send any of your questions privately in the chat to me during the presentation, and as time permits, we'll allow additional questions after the presentation. So without further introduction, Pratusha Reddy.
Hi everyone. Thank you so much for that beautiful introduction. I'm Pratt again, or I go by Pratt. My full name is Pratusha. I have had people spell Pratt on my published work, and I had to correct that after. So yeah. So anyway, I'm Pratt. I'm a sixth-year PhD student in the School of Biomedical Engineering, and today I will be talking to you about expertise development, skill acquisition, cognitive workload in an ecologically valid setting. So specifically unmanned aerial vehicle or system oriented task. So firstly, before I go into the talk, thank you so much. I really want to thank the library to allow me to publish this paper and make it open access. So now getting into the actual work. So over the last decade, there's been huge advances in technology, whether it's in automotive industry or like aviation industry or medical industry, where you've seen these huge like technologies become really advanced. They're now autonomous and they're really requiring all these aspects. This actual advancements is also really true in the unmanned aerial system field as well. So you probably knew over the last 20 years, there's been huge growth in use of drones. And then now like there's actually Amazon wants to ship parcels or using drones, right? Or deliver packages using drones. So in general, the use of drones has just increased commercially a lot, and so have the advances. And as you can see here, this is just what a drone operator, the place that they would be sitting at, and then operating the drone that is at a different location. So you can clearly see that it went from a lot of monitors to like more single monitor. You also can see that there were two people operating the same drone, but now it's a single person really doing both the tasks simultaneously. And I'll talk about the tasks in a little bit, but you could see that these changes have happened. And this technology has really enabled, the intention of the technology was to kind of allow to take some of the burden off of the human. And however, there's been a recent literature has shown that although this technology has been was with the intention of taking out this burden, that the number of accidents actually have increased tremendously since the introduction of these technologically advanced technologies. And therefore, the safety and efficiency requirements have actually not been met and are actually poorer than they were before the advancement in technology. So looking at where that actually comes from, people have identified that human factor is primarily the reasoning behind this UAS accidents. So by human factor, I'm really talking about the integration between the human and the technology. The technology has advanced, but the ability of the human to operate those technologies need to also advance. So the training that goes behind it, the expertise development, like the learning and all of these components. Furthermore, looking at the human factor alone, they looked at where what causes were related to these incidents or these accidents. And these are some factors that they identified, but what I really want you to focus on is really these two aspects. So a lot of percentage of errors are really coming from skill-based errors and judgment or decision-making errors. So, and as you can pretty much just from teaching and whatever not, you know that like the easiest way to address these aspects is to train these operators better or with newer techniques. So that gets into this phenomenon called a cognitive load theory based training program. So what cognitive load theory based training program says is that there are three aspects. So there are the task and the environment, the human, and the human is actually limited to how much mental capacity that they have, which is indicated by this the whole brain aspect. And they usually on a day-to-day basis use some amount of cognitive resources as indicated by the mental effort. And in order to do this task, you have to also look at performance, because that's really what is going to talk about the efficiency aspect. So now cognitive load theory says there is a direct relationship between task, mental effort, and performance. Specifically, for a novice person that is about to learn, for example, a UAS task, because it's your first time being introduced to it, you might need to use a lot more resources, and your performance might be low. But with adequately training them, that intention with training using this cognitive load theory aspect, you are causing this practice to decrease the amount of mental effort. So you basically are automating these processes so that you wouldn't even be using working memory constructs that are not automative. And by decreasing this effort, and also increasing the performance, you are able to engage with the task. And one way so this in this particular case, decreasing the mental effort and increasing high performance or increasing the performance pretty much says that the subject has learned this task and is able to have the skill. So now the cognitive load theory says that, okay, now was the actual skill learned or was it just factual? So in order to test that, you can actually add this transfer aspect or keep the task objectives the same and just make the environment or some small aspect of it harder, and then see how that affects your mental effort and performance. And what you expect if the task was appropriately learned was that your performance is still high, but your cognitive resources do increase, but they're not overshooted to the point that you cannot address the task. And so this is ideally what you would expect from a training scenario. However, so going back to the literature, this is usually most commonly associated training and cognitive workload literature or cognitive load literature really just focuses on the interaction between the task, the mental effort, and the performance to explain training. However, there is a huge body of literature in human factors that state that the learner itself also can affect how they're being trained and how they're learning and how they're able to transfer the learned material. Specifically, intrinsic characteristics like age and personality. By personality, I mean like motivational tendencies can have this effect. In addition to just like load that is coming from the learner itself, you can also have an interaction between the task and the learner that could also add to that load, and how much mental effort that they end up spending, or what type of performance that they actually end up having. So specifically, for example, experience is a huge interaction characteristic. So by that, I mean, for example, if you have a person that is that has played a lot of video games, they might be able to do a better job at learning a UAS task, because the environment is really similar, where you're sitting in a chair and using the mouse or the joystick to really control the camera and whatever not. While a person that does not play video games might have a much harder time learning the same skill. So that experience and that contextual element also has a huge effect on how fast you are able to get to that high performance level, how much can you be trained, and how fast can you be trained, and all that aspects. In addition to that, in a realistic setting, especially in these safety critical tasks like UAV tasks or aviation or surgery, you're usually engaging in more than one task simultaneously, and they're usually also interrelated. So for example, in the case of a UAS task, one of them is a search and surveillance task that I'll go into a little bit detail in a bit. But in that, you're really required to not only scan the task, but or scan the area, but you're also expected to find any threats, identify them, and then convey that information on to personnel that can react. So you can already see that the complexity, the duality of the task and the complexity of the task requires the individual to use different types of strategies. And by strategy, and the strategy can be innately to that person itself. For example, some of us are really good at multitasking, while others of us, and by multitasking, I mean like doing two tasks simultaneously, or being able to switch between the two tasks simultaneously, right? But there are people that would like to finish one task and then move on to the next. So that is like the strategy that I'm talking about. So whether scanning the area and then finding target, or like doing them simultaneously while you're quickly switching between, can also have an effect, again, on mental effort and performance. So how do you measure mental effort and performance? Mental effort can be measured using subjective rating methods, such as like NASA TLX, which is just a survey that asks the learner or the trainee to explain how hard that they worked during a particular task. Alternatively, physiological sensors like heart rate monitor, eye tracking really look at physiological signals, and then use that to infer how much load was placed. And then thirdly, neuroimaging, which is, mental effort is related to how much brain activity there is, right? So like neuroimaging makes sense to be measuring mental effort. Specifically, sensors such as, or imaging modalities such as electroencephalography, or like fMRI, or functional magnetic resonance imaging, or like can inform about the mental effort. Alternatively, on the performance side of things, it can really be measured by behavioral measures. By behavioral measures, I mean things like reaction time, accuracy, precision, and all of those, depending on the task at hand. So, however, so there are some limitations associated with these mental effort metrics, and this is only for the context of the study. I'm not trying to discredit that these methods are not effective. They're very effective, but for the purposes of the study, we really wanted to look at how do we directly measure mental effort. Therefore, we decided to use neuroimaging. In our future studies, we are planning on also using both subjective rating methods and physiological sensors to not only like validate the neuroimaging results, but also see if they add complementary information about mental effort. So specifically, when I talked about neuroimaging, I mentioned functional magnetic resonance imaging. If anyone's ever gotten an fMRI, it's huge, bulky. So like, and also some of these tasks that we really are trying to learn about are much more, need to be done in a realistic scenario in an ecologically valid setting. So fMRI would not be a great modality to do that. So there's been a huge emergence of this newer technology called functional near-infrared spectroscopy that actually enables measurement of brain activity at work. It's the modality that we use in our lab at Conquer Collaborative, and we've applied it in a lot of different applications, both clinical and non-clinical. So the non-clinical work is really what I'm presenting today. So the fNIRS pretty much, I can go into details after this talk about how it actually works, but in a very generic thing, it measures changes in oxyhemoglobin and deoxyhemoglobin, and they're chromophores that carry oxygen to the site of activity in your brain. So say, for example, you're paying attention to my talk right now, you'll have a lot of need for oxygen in regions of your brain that are associated with attention. So oxyhemoglobin will bring oxygen to that site, and deoxyhemoglobin will take it away. And that's how they're related to brain activity. So during a highly involved and engaged task, you'll see that there is an increase in oxyhemoglobin, or in other words, increase in brain activity. So here's a picture of the system that we currently use. And it measures from the prefrontal cortex. We specifically are focusing on the prefrontal cortex, again, because it's really the area that is associated with, that usually is activated in that beginning phases of learning. And it's really associated with a working memory, attention on these constructs that are actively being engaged and need to be modulated through time. So we chose a sensor that really just looks at the prefrontal cortex. So with that, the aim of this particular study was to investigate the effect of individual differences on skill acquisition and transfer during training on an ecologically valid task, specifically a UAS operator task. We implemented, a search and surveillance task, which is usually a payload operator oriented task. And the task itself consisted of scanning the assigned area as shown by this black box right here. So the subject was required to scan the entire area, which falls under and then the second task was to really find any threats that were present in that assigned area. So, and the reason why we chose this task was because it first, as I mentioned, the scan and the target find are interrelated. So if you improve your scanning, you should improve your finding targets. But finding target does not mean you would be improving scan, right? But you could see that the duality and the complexity of how these two tasks are interrelated. So we chose this task so that we can kind of already add that individual difference aspect into our study design as well. But from the secondary point of view, this is a particular task that these two tasks are usually trained on simultaneously by operators currently in practice. So that's another reason why we chose this particular task. Additionally, the two tasks actually need resources from two different cognitive domains. So you need to so when you're training these skills, you're not only when you're training them to improve their scan percentage or like their finding target abilities, you're asking them to really be attentive and be able to use their spatial working memory resources, which are actually localized in different areas of the brain. So these are all the reasons why we really chose this task. Here's an example of how the task was actually implemented. We actually used training simulator that is currently being training simulator by Simlet that is currently actually being used in realistic settings to train a UAS operator. So you can see here that this is where the trainee sits, and they are pretty much looking at the same screen as the instructor, and the instructor can pretty much guide them while they're engaging with the task. The particular screen that they're looking at has two different screens. There's a map screen, which is kind of demonstrated in this plot right here as well. So this is just a smaller breakdown of all the information that is being shown here. And then there is a payload screen. So whatever is actually under this field of view, as indicated by the orange polygon, is being shown in this particular figure. So a subject can will use the mouse, and there's another joystick right here to zoom in, move the camera around to completely scan the area that they're being asked. So we administered the cognitive load theory-based training protocol, which consists of two different phases. So as I said earlier, we have a practice phase, and that's when you're acquiring the skills. And then you have a transfer phase where you're really looking at whether they actually did the learning actually occurred, and they're able to transfer that into a novel setting. Specifically, we kept the task objectives the same between the skill acquisition and the transfer phases. And the only thing that we really changed was the visibility levels. So as you can see here, finding a target in this highly visible area is much easier than finding it at this darker area. So just modulated that one variable. So within the skill acquisition phase, we had 3 different sessions, and this was informed to us by subject matter experts that said that's how they train their current sensor operators, where they have them go through 3 sessions of practice every day, within which they had 6 different sub areas. So basically, going back to this plot right here, there were 6 of these that were stacked right next to each other. So within each of that, they had to scan the area, find the target, and repeat that for 6 more, and then take a pause and then repeat that session. In the transfer phase, we had 2 different sessions. Today, I'll just be reporting from this first session. So as I mentioned, to assess the effectiveness of the training program, we had to use some behavioral and some mental effort measures. The behavioral measures that we used were scanning percentage. So in relative to the area that they have been assigned, how much area was actually covered by these small polygons. So taking a union of all these polygons and then overlaying that over the actual task area. So you could see clearly in this particular case that the subject was able to scan a good portion of the assigned area. And then, so that the first metric was the scan percentage. The second metric was finding the target. So as you can see here, the subject in this case was actually able to find this target since it fell in that scan area, you can kind of see. But we had some criteria that said, okay, was it actually a proper scan and not just like moving of the joystick around? And we use that as a metric for accuracy of like how many targets were found actually within a session. So there were 6 sub areas, right? So was it a 6 out of 6 or like something else? And that would dictate that performance metric. From the brain activity side of things, as I mentioned, we used a sensor that measured from the prefrontal cortex, and we extracted mean changes in oxyhemoglobin and deoxyhemoglobin within each of these channels per each of these task areas. So now getting into the results, first we expected everyone to perform similarly, and as the name of the talk says, there were quite a bit of differences. So, and you can kind of see that the differences here are pretty huge, where you could see that some individuals decreased their performance with practice and some increased. But overall, just looking at their plot, we just saw that they decreased. So this shows that the training program might not have been effective and that they needed more training. However, as I mentioned a minute ago, there were people that improved their performances. This shows that, you know, they were experience has an effect, strategy has an effect, motivational tendencies have an effect. So those individual characteristics did stratify these people into how they performed. So, however, we did base our, this is very observational, right? So you see that, okay, there is a increase in trend within scanning. So I will classify them into one group. And then when I see a decrease, I'll classify them into another group. And of course, I will find statistical significance when I compare these aspects. But your question could be, okay, how do we validate this? So we can actually look at that secondary behavioral performance metric, which was the adaptive target find metric, right? And what we found was that people that decreased their scan performance actually increased their target find performance, while people that improved their scan performance actually showed no change or in their adaptive target find performance. So this clearly shows that there is a difference, and that this way of classifying the difference in groups is in fact correct. So then we actually conducted some statistical testing to demonstrate whether actually stratifying these subjects based on this grouping criteria actually improves model fitness. And we found that in fact, it does for both behavioral performance. And then we kind of used the same grouping that is based on scan performance and looked at whether it improved fNIRS or differences in brain activity. And we actually did see a significant improvement in model fitness, as well as indicated by the p-values right here. Specifically, we chose certain channels that in the paper we demonstrated results from all the channels, but for the purposes of this talk, I'm really going to just focus on channel 2, 7, and 12. And that's because channel 2 is localized to an area that is related to spatial working memory, while channel 12 is really associated with attention. And a lot of fNIRS literature has validated that these metrics are associated with this particular cognitive domains. Something interesting was that we also saw a lot of activity within channel 7. And although it's not as reported in fNIRS literature, going back to fMRI literature, we saw that actually channel 7 is associated with task switching. And again, this particular finding from channel 7 needs to be further validated. In addition to just these picking these 3 channels, we also did see the largest effects within these channels. So again, reason as to why we chose to talk more about these channels than the other channels. So during the skill acquisition phase, as I showed you earlier, there was a group that increased their performance from easy session 1 to easy session 3. And when we looked at their brain activity, we actually saw a decrease in activity within the attentional area. And so scan task is associated with attention. And a decrease in activity and an increase in performance showed that not only were they engaged, but they actually improved in the behavior as well. So showing that they actually were able to efficiently learn this particular skill. Looking at the adaptive target find, we saw that there was actually no change in their performance score. And then looking at the associated area, which is the working memory related area, again, target find task is a working memory associated task, we saw a decrease in activity. And this shows that there was actually disengagement in the target find task. Interestingly, as I mentioned earlier, we saw an increase in activity from easy session 1 to easy session 3. So across practice, we saw an increase in activity in channel 7. And channel 7 is really associated with task switching. And by showing an increasing this, you can see that although this group was not able to demonstrate improvement in their adaptive target find score, they were trying their best to engage in both tasks simultaneously, at least by the end of the practice. Now looking at the other group, which we called accuracy focus group, you see that their scan performance actually decreased with practice. And looking at their brain activity measures, you actually see a decrease in activity. So this type of difference in the performance and the mental effort are really associated with disengagement. And you could see that this particular group is not really engaged in the scan task. And then looking at looking at their target find purposes performance, you could see that it actually increased with practice, and there was a decrease in activity within the area that is related to spatial working memory. Again, showing that they were actually able to acquire the skills needed to work on the target find task. Lastly, we saw a decrease in activity within the area that is associated with task switching. And this really shows that this particular group really were just focused on finding targets. And this does happen when people end up playing a lot of video games, and the point of the video game is to like find certain elements and not necessarily the other more boring tasks, like just overseeing what is happening. Next, when we compared between the groups during the first session, we actually saw greater activity in the attention focused group than the accuracy focused group, especially in that working memory area. Again, this shows that the attention focused group, first, it shows that both groups were engaged, at least in the beginning, with both tasks, as indicated by this and this and this and this. But that the greater activity in attention focused group in this region shows that they actually had a harder task even trying to engage with this target find task. By the end of the skill acquisition phase, or after practice, you still saw a greater activity in the attention focused group. And this shows that even though they were having a hard time engaging with this task and needed to use more cognitive resources and accuracy focus group, that they still remained engaged with target find task. Again, this shows that, you know, they were trying to use this task switching aspect to continue to work with the both tasks simultaneously. Surprisingly, we also saw that by the end of the skill acquisition phase, that there was more activity by accuracy focused group in the scan area. So this showed that they might not have been task switching, but they were they were attempting to start getting engaged into the scan task. So during the transfer phase, we saw that the attention focused group actually were able to maintain their performance and showed an increase in activity within the attentional area. This shows that there was actually successful transfer of skills, specifically associated with the scan task. For the target find task, they actually decreased their performance, and there was no activity within the area that is associated with this particular task. Again, showing that they strictly now focus on what the task that they actually improved upon, and they stuck with that. The accuracy focus group did show transfer of the target find task. They did not show, so their performance decreased, even though their mental effort did increase. So this shows that although they were engaged in the task, because their performance decreased, we can infer this as that they need more training with this particular task, even though during skill acquisition phase, they were able to show an improvement in performance. Looking at their scan performance, you see that it actually started increasing, which is surprising because they were not able to acquire the scan task. However, looking at the activity, you see that there is a decrease in activity. So this potentially could just be movement of the joystick randomly, and that's why you see that there is an increase in the behavioral performance. But like really looking at the brain activity, you see that there's actually a decrease. So again, they were not really actually engaging with that task at all. So in conclusion, this study really worked on investigating effects of individual differences on skill acquisition and transfer during training on an ecologically valid UAS operator task using both behavioral and fNIRS measures. So in summary, we showed that there were actually two different groups of individuals, one who focused on the scan task and one who focused on the target find task, in other words, attention or accuracy. And that the attention focused group was able to acquire skills related to the scan task while remaining engaged in the target find task after practice. and were able to transfer their skills acquired during scan task, but needed more practice for the target find task. Alternatively, the accuracy focus group were able to acquire skills related to the target find task, but were disengaged in the scan task. And they needed more practice to transfer both the target find and the scan skills. So in conclusion, this shows that the study really demonstrated that accounting for individual differences, well, first it showed that accounting for individual differences is important, especially when you're assessing such a complex task. And also that actually incorporating it does improve assessment of training on complex ecologically valid tasks. So that's the end of my presentation / talk. Here is the paper if you want to scan it, and if you want to read more about it. There are a lot of results that I wasn't able to cover right now. And I'll open the floor to questions.
Thank you for presenting, Pratt. We do not have any questions in the chat, but if anybody would like to ask questions, feel free to unmute and ask.
I have a question, Matt, for Pratusha.
Yeah.
My name is Jai. I'm the engineering librarian, and I'm looking at your research. I feel that you generated so much of data during your course of experimentation and all those things. So I was wondering, where were you able to store data, and how much storage requirement was it?
So currently I am just using the Drexel's OneDrive to store all of the data, and it's circulated within our lab. So we have like a lab folder. So this particular data set is not as big, but we are actually redoing the IRB to incorporate some of the additional aspects. And that data will be very rich, and we will be needing to go to a more like different platform to be storing our data.
And will that data be in the open access platform, or how did you link your data to this journal article?
Yeah, so right now the data can be accessible if they reach out to me and send an email.
I see.
But
Okay.
ideally our lab did grow from me to having now 10 students. So we are hopefully going to be making a website where we are going to start depositing some of this data so other people can do their own analysis on it.
Okay, great.
Yep.
Thank you. Oh, one more question I have. Can your technology be used to assess the performance skills of the pilots as they board the planes or before boarding the planes?
Yeah, so yes. So functional near infrared spectroscopy is just a tool, and it has been used to assess cognitive load, training, and all of these aspects in surgeons, pilots, so commercial aviation pilots, drone pilots, so a lot of different fields. And in fact, my advisor, Dr. Izzy Hezatoglu, he actually that was some of his dissertation work, like I think maybe
Curtulus, I know
15 years ago. I'm
Yes.
not sure exactly when. But yeah, so originally we first looked at it from a pilot standpoint because the tasks are way better defined in aviation than they are with drone operations. So this is much more of a niche field, but it is growing at really fast rate in the last 20 years.
And I can see that there are possible implications for teaching and learning also, like how students learn different skills, comparing certain tasks, and I guess, I don't know.
Yeah, so we actually, so I'm working with both Dr. Shuokis and Dr. Kurtuluş Iztoglu on another project with the School of Education, where they are looking at how engineers learn, and if learning engineering via virtual reality, so looking at spatial things, actually improve ability to learn engineering skills. And in that study, again, we used a very similar cognitive training, cognitive load theory based training program, and we did see significant improvements in performance and decrease in mental effort with when virtual reality was used as an intervention versus when it wasn't. And now we actually have data from these kids that, like, throughout their biomedical engineering curriculum, and that's what we're looking at now. It's like, okay, I mean, of course the intervention was just 10 weeks, so it's not like from a huge educational standpoint, but how they improved and what are the correlations between their grades and the type of skills that they learn from these engineering classes.
Okay, great. Thank you. Great presentation.
Thank you.
Any additional questions? If not, thank everyone for attending, and thank Prat for giving us a fascinating topic and presentation. And so folks know, we do have one more talk tomorrow. I think there might be a little bit of space on site available, but there's also the ability to join in online. So we invite anybody who would like to join in for our last talk of Open Access Week. Thank you everybody for your time, and thank you for attending.
Thank you.